Hi, I'm Ryan from Amber Elm. This is the MidiVolts by Space Brain Circuits. The MidiVolts Desktop is a MIDI-based 5-octave CV controller. The unit has 4 separate CV outputs with an associated gate output. These CV outputs are called voices. Each voice operates on the 1 volt per octave standard for eurorack and most hardware synthesizers. The device has 6 different modes: mono, duo, unison, poly 3, poly 4, and CC, to control each voice in different ways. It also has a MIDI to clock output conversion, and you can customize it more with SysX MIDI messaging. Now, this video isn't sponsored by Space Brain Circuits or anyone else, but I really wanted to make a video about it. 1, because it's a really cool device, but 2, because after I reached out to the company and got to hear the story of how and why the company started, I just thought it was a really awesome example of what people can accomplish with just an idea and some hard work. If you want to skip story time with Ryan, the video is, as always, timestamped, so feel free to jump around. So the whole company is this guy Austin and his wife in St. Louis, Missouri, and it all started with the Korg Volca. Now, he loved it, but he felt limited by the sequencer and wanted to keep his setup DAW-less. So he set out to create a way to increase the number of steps, and he did with the Poly sequencer, which is a 128-step sequencer. With that under his belt, he felt like he could start building his own eurorack modules, gaining the confidence and skills required to eventually focus on a module that would allow polyphony across multiple oscillators. After getting a Moog Grandmother, and like me, loving it but wishing it was at least paraphonic, he narrowed his focus on making that happen, which led to the creation of MidiVolts for both desktop and eurorack. Each device is handmade by him and his wife with occasional help from family, and they sell them from their Etsy shop, which I'll link down below. And I love his story so much because it's just an example of someone wanting something to exist and working really hard to figure out how to make it a reality. And while Austin is a civil/software engineer by trade, and when I solder it sort of looks like a modern art project, these types of stories make building my own modules or my own MIDI controllers feel pretty possible. Anyways, thanks to Austin for sharing your story with me, and please keep making these awesome little devices. Let's get back to the MidiVolts. Earlier, I mentioned all the modes: the unison, mono, duo, poly 3, poly 4, and CC, but I got it strictly for the poly 3 mode to make Grandmother play chords. Basically, you send the oscillators to it, route the LFO to the noise source, and you've got a 3-voice paraphonic Grandmother. So let's hook it up. I'll take voice 0 and connect it to the pitch in for oscillator 1. Voice 1 goes to the pitch in for oscillator 2. Next, we'll take the wave out of our LFO and connect it to the noise in jack of the mixer. Then we can take voice 3 and connect it to the rate in of our LFO. Lastly, we'll connect the gate of voice 0 to the trigger in of our envelope. Next, we'll tune all the oscillators. For this, we'll want to be in drone mode on the Grandmother and unison mode on the MidiVolts. Once it's all tuned up, switch the MidiVolts to poly 3 and the little switch from A to B. Take Grandmother out of drone mode, and we're good to go. Now, full disclosure, this wasn't a full-on plug it in and you're off to the races situation for me. When I got it, I hooked it up the way I just explained, and it didn't work right. And I got pretty discouraged and just started making patches with my eurorack and Grandmother. I sort of ditched the idea of making a video with it just because I didn't really want to trash it on here, especially if it's because I'm an idiot who doesn't know how to use it. But after a night of sort of being bummed that I didn't have a paraphonic Grandmother, I remember seeing a YouTube video by Space Brain Circuits that was a troubleshooting guide. The next morning, I went to watch it, and sure enough, all the problems I was having were pretty common issues. I followed the steps on the video and was up and running in like 5 minutes. Not perfectly, but enough to want to keep figuring it out. Later in the video, I'll go into some of these issues in case you have one and are having issues, or you plan on getting one and want to use this as just sort of like a setup guide. So let's see what this all sounds like. For this first patch, I'll just keep it simple with only the Grandmother so we can hear her in all of her paraphonic glory. this next patch, I introduced Strymon Magneto and Starlab, and I'm triggering the sample function of Magneto with a Euclidean trigger from Pamela's Pro Workout. The only thing I have to say that isn't like 100% positive about this is it's 5 volts per octave, so you end up with sort of a limited range on Grandmother. You can work around this by kind of resetting it every time and choosing sort of the range before you turn off local mode. And I'll link to a Space Brain Circuits video talking about that. And also because you're playing it paraphonically, you're sort of limited in the stops that the oscillators are on. Not really literally, but if you tune it up and you're on stops 8 for both the oscillators and then you change one of them to 16 feet or 4 feet or 2 feet, you're gonna end up with some inversions that you probably weren't intending on. And also because you're using the LFO to generate a voice, you're losing the LFO from Grandmother. That last one doesn't really bother me too much because I'm using it in eurorack, so I could just sort of patch it. I could actually just add a different oscillator to my noise source and then keep my LFO free on Grandmother. That actually might work. Let me see if this works. I'll be right back. The short answer is no. No, it doesn't work. And I don't really know why. I'm looking into it. But I did stumble on a pretty fun patch. Taking After Ladder Audio's Pixie and running that as the third oscillator through the noise in. There's a setting that gives a chord and you can kind of choose the inversion and it adds a nice bit of thickness. Some pointers I could give you would be to keep your oscillators at around 10 o'clock. It distorts, at least it did for me when I turned them up pretty high. Also, turn local mode off. It's pretty simple to do this. Just hold the shift and sync button, then press D sharp, and then F twice. And when you're done and want to turn local mode back on, just repeat the process, but instead of pressing the F twice, press G twice. So what's it good at? Well, my grandmother is paraphonic now, which is pretty awesome, but also the support for it is really good, and now I'll be playing with it for the next few weeks, trying to squeeze every drop of juice, trying to squeeze every drop of juice out of it, which is something I think we could all probably learn to do a little more. If you want to see a video of me going into that bag of worms, click up here. I think I'll try to hook this thing up to my Taiga next, maybe, but until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.